I mean, if we're talking about self-defense, one thing I'm always harping on is the 3 E's. If you're outside, there are 3 E's. There's the entry, there's the execution of the technique, and then the exit, and that's what most people forget. They come in like empty hand, they go in, they go, oh yeah, I got the punch in, but they're standing there. The guy's gonna punch you back. So the exit has to be. So once you get into range to hit, you then need to either exit back or forward, so you're not in that striking range, that trading range right there.
Mr. Burton Richardson, I've got to say, I've been seeing a little bit too much of your face recently, if there is such a thing, because not only am I working my way through your book, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the Street, I'm also working through your Knife Defense for the Street program. So for the last couple of days, it's been all Burton all the time.
Oh, no.
Well, oh, no, but oh, yes, because it's some really good stuff. And it's an aspect, I think, I mean, let's just talk about jiu-jitsu to start with, and then I want to get into the more knife-specific stuff. The number of times that I've said to people that jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, is a fantastic sport, but at its core, it's a martial art. And because it's a martial art, it means that you kind of need to have some kind of idea of how to use it in a fight. I think with jiu-jitsu, some of that is inevitable. Like, you'll just learn to deal with pressure. So even if you never think about using it in a fight, you might not be completely clueless if you get into a confrontation. But there's some big differences between rolling in the dojo and potentially using this stuff in the street or in the shopping mall or wherever you tend to get into fights at the bar. What are some of the big differences between sort of the dojo environment and the street environment? We'll just say street environment for like using this stuff in real life.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, exactly. We'll use street environment for wherever it could be in a bedroom, whatever it is, but we're talking basically no rules, extreme self-defense situation. So, the first thing, just to, like you're doing, give the credit to jiu-jitsu. In jiu-jitsu, you work against a resisting partner every class. I mean, there are classes nowadays in this day and age that have drilling classes and technique classes, but generally, if you're getting good at jiu-jitsu, you're rolling a lot because that's how you actually end up feeling what's happening and responding without thought and shutting things down, being able to anticipate what's going to happen. So that's great. And in a real fight, you have that degree of unpredictability that you can actually, by physically grabbing someone and controlling them, now you create more predictability and you dictate the fight. You actually dominate the situation. Now, on the street, of course, there are a lot of elements that aren't in sport jiu-jitsu. And I find it interesting that there are people, anytime this comes up, they're like, oh, they're bringing up that old, no rules thing again, as though it's not pertinent anymore. I think what happened before is, as you know, there were a lot of people that didn't want to do jiu-jitsu. They didn't want to do MMA. They didn't want to do any of these sports.
I would just eye gouge you and bite your groin and tickle you and use my pressure points, and you would be defeated.
Absolutely. Total defeat, too. You might kill somebody with that tickle technique. But nowadays, we have to say, hey, jiu-jitsu is great. The sports, even MMA, sport of MMA is great, but there is more. So I like to look at it like this, if we could just put it in this context. So if you take a wrestler, okay, good wrestler, and you take a jiu-jitsu practitioner of the same caliber, same amount of time, same caliber, and you put them to a match where it's not just wrestling, but you can do submissions, who do you think is going to win that?
Jiu-jitsu guy, 8 times out of 10, 9 times out of 10.
Yeah, and I like 8, 9, not 10, because there are some wrestlers that are just going to be so crushed. Okay, right. All right, so now we take that jiu-jitsu, and let's say we're going no gi. We don't add the gi in there. Okay, take no gi, and you take a guy that's really good at no gi, put him into MMA world with someone of similar caliber. And again, what happens? We change the rules. And of course, the MMA guy has a huge advantage because of the striking and the understanding of the position and such. Okay, great. Well, let's take it another step yet and say, okay, now there's not just striking and elbows and takedowns and all, but there are weapons involved. And there are multiple opponents and all these other factors. So now this takes it up another level. And the person who trains like an MMA or jiu-jitsu athlete, meaning training with resistance, but they train in that environment where there are more elements involved, well, they are going to have a huge advantage there. And so when we're talking about someone that does just straight jiu-jitsu, sport jiu-jitsu, even no-gi, which we love, I mean, we spend a large portion of our life doing these things, and for a long time. But I'm very concerned about people actually not just losing the tournament or losing the medal, but losing their life or losing a loved one because they didn't understand the difference. Mm. So the number one factor is weaponry, because you can outclass someone with your jiu-jitsu tremendously. Yeah. But if you have, even if you have MMA training, imagine someone's in your guard, or you're on top. You end up half guard, and you get a head and the arm, and you got your control, you're crushing, you got your cross face, and you're working to pass the mount or something. Well, one of their arms is free. And if that hand reaches in, pulls out a knife or a pistol, they are now totally in charge, right? And you probably won't know what's happening until it's too late. Mm-hmm. So that's why training with the weapons involved, it's not just about knowing. I mean, you talk to people all the time about self-defense. And would you say that everybody, if you said, would you expect a weapon in a self-defense situation, how many people are going to say yes?
Yeah, a significant percentage, but it's not at all reflected in how they train ever, or almost never.
And that's the issue, is because we do our training. Just because it's here does not mean it comes out here. I mean, if you could just watch a jiu-jitsu video, somebody watch one of your fine videos that you've been blessing this community with for so long. They watch the video, they're going to pick up pointers. And if they're already training, you may give them a detail that makes a difference. Like, again, I'll just say it. Years ago, just looking at your leg lock videos and understanding some principles, you said, generally, you keep the person's foot when you're doing a knee bar between your head and the ground. So if it flips to the other side, you switch over, it's between the head and the ground. Things like that you can pick up quickly. But we know we have to take those techniques and actually train them. So same thing with that concept of, hey, of course I'm going to expect a weapon. Well, you get into it, you don't have time to think and realign your thoughts until something cues you in that, we're not training like normal. And that cue is usually a knife hitting into a bone or a gunshot, something like that. So my point is, hey, if you're interested in self-defense, not everybody is. Not everybody thinks it's that important. But if you're training for self-defense, highly suggest that you regularly say, okay, we're going to do self-defense, BJJ for the street. That's why I call it, because it's easy to think about. And guess what? There are all kinds of techniques and tactics and strategies we get into once we now put into just the weaponry environment, not to mention the striking and the multiple opponents and all that. But it's important to not just know it, but to train it.
Well, both in your book and in your knife defense for the street course, one very common position is where you're using both hands to control the knife, and you end up turning your back to your opponent, which is a cardinal sin in jiu-jitsu 99.99 times out of 100, unless you're doing something crazy, unless you're Sakuraba level insane. But in the rolling around on the ground that I had done, and I went through a phase of this, I'd say about 10 years ago with training knives, it's very common. The guy pulls out a knife, you go two hands on that knife, and the position, of course, ideally, you'd like to be controlling that knife and be on knee mount on top of the guy, but the hierarchy of positions becomes way secondary to the hierarchy of gripping and controlling that damn weapon. And sometimes turning your back is an effective way to control it, and you're trading off a small risk of the choke for a very large risk of getting shivved repeatedly in your ribs,
which is fatal. Yeah, it's a fatal deal. Yeah. The turning your back, interesting. Let me talk about that just a little bit. And if you're out there listening, like, well, why would you, if you don't turn your back with no weapons involved, why would you ever turn your back if there is a weapon involved? And as Stefan mentioned, is because you need to focus on maintaining the grip on that weapon arm. Okay, now that brings up this idea. I'll describe it if you're not watching, if you're listening. The outside 2-on-1, sometimes called the Russian tie, outside 2-on-1 capture in wrestling, where you're outside the person's arm and you're gripping with both your arms, hugging it tight to your torso. So it's very difficult for them to extract that arm. They have to really know what they're doing. So it's such a strong grip and you have such great control and you're not turning your back. You're outside of their arm. There are all these great benefits. So commonly in a lot of self-defense, like realistic self-defense nowadays, you'll see people, that's their go-to move against the knife. I get to the outside and I'm on the inside, I'm going to switch to the outside, I'm going to get that grip. Now they can't get their arm out, I have control of the knife arm and I can take them down, etc. But we are not after control of the knife arm. That's one portion of it. We are after control of the knife. Because if you go on the outside, when you get a grip, exactly, they are going to switch hands. And now I'll tell you, years ago, you might be saying, maybe you're out there saying, come on, what's the chance of someone switching hands in a real situation? And that's exactly what I used to say. Because once the idea that hand switch came up, it was clear that was something very difficult to deal with. So I would tell my students, I'm talking like 15, 20 years ago, you know, what are the chances? Okay, well, as more and more video of actual knife attacks came out, it turned out, oh, it's very good. It's like it happens naturally when someone is of the mindset that they want to insert metal into someone's body and kill them. When that arm is stifled, they simply switch hands and keep pumping. And often after they get a couple in with the offhand, they switch back to their strong hand. And that's it. I see it over and over in actual videos. Now we go back to the 2-on-1. Again, if we look at actual videos of actual attacks, the natural thing to do is to backpedal and to try to grab at that arm to keep it away from you. Okay? If there are certain situations when people can't move back, then they just grab it. Okay, so this is why the 2-on-1 grip is so important. You get the baseball, like grabbing a baseball bat, but again, you're holding down and someone strong can rip that grip right out of your hand. It's just, that's another thing people criticize that grip for, and it's true. Unless you get in close, turn your back almost like you're going to do a shoulder throw. But the main reason for turning the back, besides that control and the grip, is because it makes your body becomes a barrier to them switching hands. The empty hand has a very hard time reaching around and switching the hand. That gives you more time to possibly disarm on their body, disarm with your hand, take them down, whatever you need to do. But it's vital, it turns out. And so if you just remember this for knife defense, when you're practicing, besides actually practicing, all the people out there, besides just practicing with a resisting partner like you do everything else, not just holding the knife out, which we'll talk about in a moment, the main thing is you control the knife by controlling the knife arm and stopping the hand switch. You need both of those, or they're going to switch hands and now you're back to square one and they know what you're trying to do, which makes it hard again.
So what people might not realize here, Burton, is that you have an impeccable Filipino martial arts background. Like a very, very good pedigree. Have trained with many, I hesitate to use the term, but recognized masters or recognized world-class authorities. I've trained with some of the same people. I've done a fair amount of Filipino martial arts, mostly Paquita Tercia, a little bit of Balintawak, Santo Lacoste methods. And the position that comes out when you spar the knife, either on the ground or standing, that 2-on-1 grip, I've never been taught that in any of the Filipino martial arts systems that I've studied or any of the Filipino martial arts systems that I've kind of passively, Villabreo method. I haven't done a lot of Villabreo method. I've watched a fair bit of Villabreo method. I've never seen it there. Other methods that specialize in knife, I've not seen it. So Uh, I guess this is a two-pronged question. Number one, where does all the, we'll call it classical Filipino martial arts training that you've done come in? And number two, where did that approach to the 2-on-1 being not the only answer, but one of the better answers that we found so far, other than hitting the guy with a handy 2x4 or running faster than him, which is a 50-50. Obviously, those are better solutions, or pulling out a gun if you have it. But if you're going empty hand against knife, where did you come up with that? Because I've not seen that in any other classical systems.
Okay, so first I'll say the reason, this is my understanding and from my experience. So yes, I trained with Dan and Asano. I started with him. I actually started classes with him in 1980. And I went to school in 79 to watch. And then as soon as I could, they had a class open, I started. And then he brought in all kinds of different masters to train with. And then I had the very good fortune of being able to train with a man named Ilustrismo in the Philippines on 2 different prolonged training trips. And the thing about some of these men from Guru Dan, Santo, and that he brought in, and then Ilustrismo, is they actually did this. I mean, they fought with swords. You don't find that too much anymore. Where if you talk to a jiu-jitsu person that's done very well in competition, you're like, wow, I'm going to listen, really see what they have to say. You talk to Ilustrismo, who fought sword against sword. He actually did 2 matches. Actually, let's have a match. I'm so confident I'm going to win this, because he had so many sword fights in World War II, all these knife encounters, lived in the worst area of the Philippines, all this stuff. But getting to the 2-on-1, why isn't it in there? It's because in the Southeast Asian general philosophy, understanding of fighting, why would you ever be without a knife? Well, the only reason is you somehow lost it. And so really, there's empty hand against a knife. You do this and all that. But I believe that most of that was to keep it off you, push away, and draw another weapon. And for example, Pikita Tertiary, you're talking about Grandmaster Leo Gahe, he usually has 3 knives on him. He would say, one for you, one for your friend, and another one in case you lose yours. And so, it's like, why would you possibly, if you lose your weapon, that's your fault, basically. But there is an empty hand backup. But it's, even though there are a lot of techniques, you do this, you take it up, you go here, you do this disarm, and that disarm, and that disarm. The disarms, when they're going sword against sword, knife against knife, even stick against stick, it's highly emphasized by the fighters. Gudan also, but the guys that actually fought this sword against sword, that you don't disarm usually until the guy's almost done. But the thing is, you've debilitated him so much. He has a sword and he's almost finished. There's not much strength left in him, But if he goes like that and that thing goes in your eye or goes in your throat, that still is really bad news. So that's why they have him pretty much finished, and then they take a moment, they go disarm, and then finish the person off. So when you go to empty hand, it's those disarms and all empty hand work when the person's highly debilitated. So you had a knife and you cut and you went to the throat, say, it sounds terrible, but imagine invading people, trying to take the raping and just the horrible things they did. You take it out, boom, you put it in, now they're about gone, and you do the disarm. So those disarms come usually from knife to knife fighting. But the thing is, it wasn't pressure tested. And so what I did, so to answer the question how I came up with this thing, it's the exact same way you came up with it. One day I had this thing, because I was one of the original Dog Brothers, which is, for people who don't know, it's full contact, have a head protection, some light hand protection, a big heavy stick, and you go all out. Kind of like MMA, but with a stick with a little bit of protection. And that teaches you what happens under full pressure and power, where you're not just sparring, but you're afraid of being injured. There's that injury factor, like, man, I could really get hurt here. So that changes things. But from that idea, that feeling, understand like, oh, if we don't spar it, we'll never really get good at actual fighting. I just was playing, doing my knife against empty hand. And I think one day I just had somebody, I said, hey, just like, let's spar this and see what happens. And they're like, what a revelation. All this was not working well at all. And so I think what I did, I think the difference was that I just made that as a routine, that I would do it. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to do this until I figure something out that, or maybe not, maybe I won't figure anything out, but I just did it. So I did it and I did it. And then incrementally, the 2-on-1, like, oh, this works pretty well. A little bit later, oh, you can disarm on the leg. You can actually do that. Not just it's like a thought, but it actually do it in practice. And then problems would come up, different sizes of people. I used to, when a knife and underhand repeated, I used to come in with my hands like this to try to immediately get that baseball bat grip, but it's a narrow profile, so sometimes it would slip. So instead of having my hands together, I switched to this, and it made a huge difference. The success rate went up.
So you're blocking with one forearm while coming in, which is almost a knife tapping movement. If like that was when I've been watching your stuff, I'm like, I think I know where that movement comes from, or at least of an analogous movement in the classical Filipino martial arts, using the back of the forearm to present a wider profile. And also, I mean, if you get cut on the back of your forearm, it's not as bad as getting cut on the inside of your forearm.
Exactly. And that is exactly right. A lot of the things that I would end up trying came from the traditional Filipino martial arts. And you find out, oh, it fits here. This is where that fits. Somebody comes up here, hi, it's the same thing. You're basically going block and scoop through like you would in the drilling, in the knife tapping, but you crash and you forward pressure so the person doesn't have as much freedom of movement, which turns out, again, everybody listening, when you're practicing forward pressure, overriding your instinct to run away or to move back. No, wait a second. Let me just go back on that. Running away is your best bet by far, right? Just make sure. Number one, you run away. You do whatever you can to just make distance. Okay, now you have your families with you. You can't run away.
Backing up slowly while trying to block shots is a pretty bad idea.
Yes, that backing up, it really doesn't work well. Again, what happens, one of my ways of doing this that I've done over the years is I realized I don't explain it to people first, especially I have somebody new and they're somewhat athletic and all. I said, hey, let's just put the helmets on. Here, now stab me as many times as you can. And so they get to do, without any pre-programming, they do whatever comes natural. And I do this in my class sometimes too, but when a couple of these are blocked without getting grabbed, naturally they go up high, and which is a whole another thing. So you want to, if you can't run, and second thing is to arm yourself. If you can't arm yourself or have an improvised shield that you can maybe even hit with, if all those things go, and the shield, that's not just a throwaway. I mean, the shield makes a huge difference. If you can grab a shield, you grab a shield. You do not want to go empty-handed against a knife. But if it's on you, there's an ambush, and it's on you already, you have to have that instinct to go forward, because the knife works because it's moving, right? It's moving like this, or it's moving like that. And that's, that's just multiple stabs over the top or underneath, those upwards or uppercut shots to the gut over and over. It's just instinctual that people do that, and it's over and over. You need to do your best to block and move in to take away that mobility of the knife. Then you have a chance to get that grip, because if you can, anybody actually watching here, the knife arm goes forward, it stops for a second. If you grab here, at that point, it's hard to get that grip. But then it goes back and it goes to zero, turns around and starts again. This is where you want to catch it, because it's not moving for a split second. And then you're in here and they're tighter. They don't have as much mobility. They're going to move away. You have to curve with them. There's a lot to it, actually, if you want to do it at a high level. But it's simple. It's still simple and it's instinctual. As long as you go crash, stay with them, like turning the corner on a double. You stay in with them so they don't turn away from you. You get that 2-on-1, you turn your back to keep them from switching hands, and then you're working on doing whatever you can to get that knife away, or hold it long enough that those you're protecting can get away, and then you make some distance and you exit yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's what's the when you've asked untrained people or even trained people to come at you so you can get that sort of untutored attack, what's the craziest thing that somebody's done? Like, have you ever? I mean, most of it's that underhanded stabbing, or maybe in a hammer grip, that overhead stabbing coming down at roughly a 45-degree angle to the neck or the head.
Right. And most of the people I hand them, I don't tell them how to hold it. I hand it, and almost everybody grabs it point up, and they do the underhand grip. Some people grab it point down, and they do the overhand. And interestingly enough, I've studied a lot of this Piper system from South Africa, and Lloyd de Jong, the instructor from South Africa, he says, in South Africa, we don't understand why you hold the knife point up. It just makes no sense to us at all. We always hold it point down. Everybody does. We just don't understand it. And just like in America, I think or Western world, I should say, using a knife while eating and all, I don't know if it's from that, but we tend to be
fencing, maybe.
On
guard.
On guard, fencing, right. So, but I've had people, very rarely, but a guy goes like this, and he took it, and he spun and did a spinning slash, which I was not expecting that, but the hands came up, and it probably hit me on the way through and all, but the forward pressure nothing happened. I had one person shoot on me, which was kind of interesting. Take the knife and and they shot, and I started my defense for the shot, and then here comes the knife, and it was tough because his head was between me and the knife, and he's wrapping around. I'm trying to stop that thing, and that was not easy to deal with. None of it's easy to deal with.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just be very clear. None of it's easy to deal with, but that was particularly hard until I was able to make some distance, and then he came at me, and then it was more of a instinctual sort of thing. But I can't think of any other ones that were really unusual. I mean, some people they start the thrust high and then go to a slash low from the Filipino martial arts background. But most of the people when I say just stab me as many times as you can, they're not being too tactical about it.
Your point about the shield is well taken. I saw footage recently of somebody running amok in the London, I think it was a London subway system, so in the tube. And it was somebody who had a knife, and I don't know if he was high or drunk. He was not behaving or just totally off his rocker, but he was running around threatening people. And a guy basically took a small backpack and was using that to pick off the shots. And you think it's just a small little backpack. There's a reason that people in the Middle Ages fought with buckler shields, which were 12 inches across. It's because something's better than nothing. And also, if I hold a buckler shield right in front of my chest, I protect 12 inches of my chest. If I'm holding it out away from me, it's like a cone of protection. It protects quite a bit more than. Have you seen that footage of the backpack defense?
I did not see that footage, but it's actually, that's another instinctual thing. People will back up. They'll try to grab something. They'll get a chair. There's a real terrible one. They're all pretty terrible. One, just really, the guy takes out several security guards, and it's looks like just outside of a supermarket, and they've got shopping carts, and they're trying to use these to keep the guy away, which is the thing to do. But the guys that went and tried to grab him were the guys that ended up on the ground bleeding out. So the shield, if I can emphasize that in the knife defense program, I go over that a little bit, but actually I should really emphasize that more, because that is what you want to do. If you can't run, you really want to try to work a shield. So in our classes, we take, there's a kicking shield back here, but we take kicking shields and we say, okay, I'll put it on the ground, and there'll be some people walking around that are empty hand, and some people walking around with a training knife, and suddenly whenever somebody wants to just pull that knife and run, they go. And the first thing is that if they can, they try to pick up the shield and they use the shield defensively, but also offensively, because it makes a big difference. Like machete attacks. I have several videos captured machete attacks, and one of the best defenses is picking up a plastic chair and you using it like this, and it actually keeps people safe. So we should be thinking in terms of shield, which is where you need to try to recognize. So if we can move to this, so we're talking about the thrust coming in, and actually let me talk about that a little bit more. Trained with me for quite a long time, and he is a police officer on the East Coast, and he was out. It was at night. This is 2 days before Thanksgiving, and he went to a call. There was a distressed woman with a knife. He gets there. Woman's not there anymore, and the mother says she does not have the knife. Okay, so they're walking back to the car, and of course, this guy has an amazing background. I mean, phenomenal background. And he's going back to the car, and it's dark, and it's lined with trees. This walk, and as he's walking, he feels this thud. And actually, he said it's by his solar plexus, like boom, thud, and actually stopped him. He's a pretty put together guy there. And then he sees a flash of metal, and he immediately charged in. And he said, forearm first, and because he practices this all the time, forearm first, got the grab, 2-on-1. Did he go and just disarm off her leg? No, he slammed. It was a woman, right? He said 165 pounds, 5'6", so like a younger woman, somewhat athletic, but slammed her in a tree so hard that she collapsed, and then his buddy was able to go in and secure her while he got the knife. So that kind of a thing, what saved him was he had his vest on, right? It hit the ceramic plate, and actually it hit so hard that it broke the tip of the knife off. And I posted a picture of the knife on Facebook about that time on Instagram. But on that situation, if you are not trained to immediately just go in and go forward, you're going to be lost. If you're backpedaling, probably going to fall down. They're probably going to fall on top of you or get on top of you, and then it's really, really bad. But because of his training, now this guy had his firearm with him, right? Because a lot of times I hear still from police like, I got a gun. I don't need empty hand against a knife. I got a gun. Why would? Because when they ambush you, you do not have time. As a matter of fact, if they're even somewhat close and they're charging, and you see them coming and you take the time to try to draw, now you've just occupied both your hands and you're even in a worse position yet. So when ambushed, you just have to have that instinct and the training to go forward. Very simple. But the shield, anything you can do shield-wise, it's just going to really enhance your odds quite a bit.
So before we send a whole bunch of people out to the Jiu-Jitsu dojo to grab their folders or grab a kitchen knife and start sparring with live blades, how do you train? How do you find the sweet spot between, obviously training the most realistically would be with a live blade, and you'd get 1 or 2 goes with a training partner, then you'd have to find a new training partner or you'd be dead. So that's not going to be ideal. Another would be in a completely nerfed out world where we just LARP our way through it. Okay, you're going to feed me attack 1, and then you're going to freeze out in the air, and I'm going to do my stuff, and I'm going to look good. And then, then we get into total McDojo world. And somewhere in the middle is resistance without insanity. It's sparring against resistance without getting injured every second class, without losing eyes, without, getting stabbed, without breaking ribs.
Resistance without insanity.
No.
Wow. If you could jot that down, I don't have anything to write with. I'll come back and find it. Stephen Kesting, resistance without insanity. That's beautiful. So going into that, this is one of the things I'm trying to change. In jiu-jitsu, there is this huge disconnect where we go in and we train, and everybody knows the way you get good at training and get good at jiu-jitsu is you train against a partner who is resisting you. Okay? And we'll get to the intensity in a little bit. Then we say, oh, we have to do the self-defense portion also. Okay, I'm going to take a knife. Now, everybody knows if you're mounted on somebody, okay, you may be able to get an Americana. Okay, still, it's really not the highest percentage move, even. Yeah. Okay, now let's put somebody in your guard. Okay, what are the chances of pulling off an Americana on someone who's in your guard? Right? It's
1 in 1,000. You better have 100 pounds on the guy.
Yes, it's just not even worth trying. Okay. Now let's go standing up, and let's put a knife in the hand, and the person has a knife point down. They come plunging down. You do an upward block. You wrap your arm over, put them into an Americana, and then you take them down. Somehow magically with a knife, you can do things that never work at all empty-handed. And that's the disconnect, because with the self-defense, it's like you're saying, it's step by step, no resistance, and let's not explore it. And let's just do it because it's, we want to make sure you know self-defense. Well, you don't know self-defense if you're doing that. If you could go like you're saying, the McDojos, any of them, and learn that kind of thing where you learn techniques that don't work. And it's really a shame that that's in jiu-jitsu. I just want to change that for the safety of our jiu-jitsu people. One of the things that really prompted me to really put this out was that there was a guy in Rio, and again, he was a great guy. Everybody loved him. He was a tournament competitor. He trained his black belt at a particular school in Ipanema, and was great with the kids, took them to tournaments. Anyway, everybody loved this guy. Well, he had been robbed a couple times on the bus down there, which happens often. And then he was in the bus, and here comes a guy again, has the gun, and he's robbing everybody. And he had enough of this. And this is a big, strong guy, really good jiu-jitsu guy. While the gunman had his back to him, he went up and he did a rear naked choke on him. Okay? Great. Can you imagine how much pressure he can put on a rear naked choke? The gunman reached over and shot him just above the eye and killed him. Because as good as he was at jiu-jitsu, he didn't know the first thing about pistol defense, which is you grab the pistol itself with both hands, which is the most basic thing. You keep it pointed away from you. You keep it with both hands. So coming back, I just really bothers me that people teach self-defense that doesn't work in jiu-jitsu, which works. So now going to saying, okay, well, how are we going to train this? Because
and I'll say this, which will probably piss some people off. I think as MMA evolved, like initially, jiu-jitsu by itself pretty much was enough to win MMA. I mean, Royce Gracie versus Dan Severn, Royce Gracie versus, professional welders who fought a little bit on the side and went to Kempo school. The Keith, more power, all power to them for getting in that cage, because at that time, people thought they were going to die. But pretty much they were. But as the sport of MMA evolved, and takedown defense evolved, and getting back up to your feet evolved, and recognizing the basic submissions and not falling into, triangle chokes and arm bars and not turning your back evolved, a certain segment of the jiu-jitsu community has backed away from saying, we're not really for that MMA stuff. We're more for the self-defense stuff. And as they're retreating there, they're doing more and more of the kata form that was in the original Japanese jiu-jitsu. So it's this weird return, like Japanese jiu-jitsu as taught in the 1800s and 1900s and 2000s is essentially a series of rehearsed two-person katas, mostly. There's other stuff there too, but yeah. Then it went into judo, which combatified it in the sense that, like, hey, let's actually spar this. Let's throw out the neck breaks, but let's let's see what we can train under pressure. That went into jiu-jitsu, and now they're retreating full circle back to, like, oh, somebody's stabbing me with a knife. I will do a rising block. I will do a figure four arm lock. Good luck. Like, I've seen a lot of stick fighting. I've seen a fair amount of sport knife fighting. I've never seen one figure four lock in action ever, not once.
Ever. Yes, I'm with you. It's a shame, but isn't it interesting when what year did you start jiu-jitsu?
Uh, late 80s, I think, unofficially late 80s.
Yeah, so you actually started before me. I started actually started dabbling in about 92 or so,
Yeah,
93, and then I really got serious like 94-ish.
yeah,
But back in those days, like when I started, I'll just say, we're doing jujitsu, but everybody had this idea of fighting.
yeah.
It's like we're learning this not to go in a jujitsu tournament. We're learning this to do a cage fight
Yeah.
or an actual fight. That was the point. That's why a lot of times there was slapping, either slapping, or there was some light punching.
That's why everyone was running around. Everyone was running around in their bad boy shorts and nothing else, covered,
That's right.
covered in sweat.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. And if you weren't in that area, he is literally saying bad boy shorts and nothing else.
Yeah.
That was it.
Super tight. You think European Speedos with a logo right on your ass.
Oh, those good old days. But we were training to fight.
Yeah.
And then as MMA took over, like you said, I was like, oh, well, jiu-jitsu is where you go to not get punched in the face. You can kind of feel like you're doing MMA, and it's really cool. And you can watch an MMA match with your friends and go, hey, look, he's passing the guard right here, and he's going to look to set up the mount. Oh, look, he mounted. Oh, now he's going to move to the back. Everybody could get a feel, and it's, jiu-jitsu is so good for you. If you just train sport jiu-jitsu, the character development, if you're open to character development, and you have that good mindset and the things you learn, it's just such a great thing in your life. But as far as the original, the self-defense aspect, yeah, that really went backwards. And then that whole thing, I think it was to honor the roots, but it actually does a disservice to honor the roots if you're saying this is for self-defense. Because at some point, and this is my thing with the knife, at some point, one of your students, if you teach enough people, somebody's going to have to deal with a knife. And you want to make sure, at least my point of view is, anything could happen. I could go out and someone could jump me with a knife and they could just tear me up, I'm done. And that's just the way it is. It's just the reality. And I know that's same with my students. Any of them can get it. Thus far, thank goodness. I get to reach a lot of people. I've had 8 people now. The one the other night was the 8th in the last about 20 years that have actually confronted the knife, used the method. Some portions of it is mainly, almost always the baseball bat grip most of the time, sometimes stifling the draw, whatever. But so far, so good. But the point is, if I taught that, I said, you know what? I just want them to be entertained, or I want this, or whatever it is, and I teach them this thing. So what happens when one of my students gets confronted with a knife and actually dies then?
Yeah.
So I don't feel like I gave them a fighting chance.
Yeah.
And that's what we're trying to do is give them a fighting chance to prevail, right? To really prevail in that situation. And not, I look at it like food. You have a kid, and it's very tempting. The kid, what does a kid want to do? Wants to eat candy all day and eat junk and all that. Well, you can't let them make the choice. We are the adults. We're the ones with the experience. We're the ones that's supposed to say, yeah, I know that stuff looks really cool and it's very attractive, but no, we're doing this because this is what's actually going to be good for your body and good for your mind if you ever get into a situation.
So how then do you spar or train against resistance safely while either with a knife or a simulated knife, with a stick or a simulated stick, by which I mean padded stick, or with a live gun or with a simulated gun? Like, what does it look like when you're rolling around on the ground and you want to introduce weapons?
Okay, so, and this is the key thing, it's the training methods. You can have a great technique that has a high percentage, but it's, how do you train it? So first of all, we never train with live blades, live pistols, anything, never. And I'm saying against a resisting partner. We never do that. And there are people I know that do sometimes. And like, hey, let's do this, or let's start in this grip and feel what it feels like. Okay, I would say one slit and a perforated colon, probably not worth the little bit of extra knowledge you would get by putting the blade instead of a training weapon, because it's just the consequence of the failure is so much greater with an actual weapon. I can take the training weapon and I can fail over and over again, and I can acknowledge the failure and like, oh, I just died there. Oh, I just died again. But I can now continue to practice. So what it looks like is much like jiu-jitsu training. You have some people that go crazy in jiu-jitsu and they spaz and they're dangerous, and we try to avoid that. But when people get better, they can train harder, they're in control, and they can train with more intensity. So what I implemented a long time ago in all my training, so what I realized was it's one thing as we're training, like we have a certain mentality about training, like we cannot help but train, and we push ourselves and we put ourselves in positions actually in danger with our training sometimes, early on especially, but that's what we're okay with that. But there are a lot of people who want to train and they do not want to push it to that intensity level. So I started this progressive resistance, taking it from bodybuilding term. You go in, if you're going to bodybuild, let's say you're going to squat, okay? You go in. What do? They put a broomstick on your shoulders and you learn proper form and technique, and you do that. And once you get that, and you might get a little sore just from that at first, then you start adding an actual bar. And then over time, you add weight. You progressively add resistance as your body adapts to the stimulus or the stress. So then we do the same thing with our training. We start lightly and slowly until the person starts to adapt to that. And then when they feel like they're adapting well, and you look, you say, okay, let's take it up a little bit. Now you'll have some people that are, some athletes, they're like, I want to go 100% today. Okay, you know what you're doing. We'll put on a little bit of padding to protect the forearm from, especially when that knife comes in really hard, the training knife, and you slam your forearm in, I mean, you really make quite an impact there. So I usually will put a forearm protection on the person defending so they can have the padding, but they still have their hands free to grip and all. But we use progressive resistance. So a little more resistance, a little more resistance, a little more trying to defeat the technique. And then we add variable intensity to that. So resistance, meaning they're trying not to let you have it. So at first, now here, anybody feeding the knife, I would highly suggest the first thing, the feeder. When we're doing traditional martial arts, like a lot of traditional Filipino martial arts, we have to train the feeder to feed correctly to make you look good. We do the opposite. We try to train the feeder to make you look bad, to make you fail, right? Because that's what we're trying to get. We're trying to get those failures out of the way. So the first thing, when you feed, do not hold your arm out there, because that's not what happens. People hit and they're trapped and they do it multiple times. So at first, we do it slowly. Ready? Okay, one, like this, but the feed is still congruent with actual real life, looking at videos of people actually killing someone else with a knife. So then we can little by little do that. Then we start adding extra resistance and pulling back a little harder, maybe pushing this hand, maybe going up to low to high, and then we start upping the intensity. But I have people put on a headgear with a face mask when they start bringing the intensity up, so that you can go up high. Because if you never put that helmet on, no one's ever going to actually stick you in the face with it.
Or they will, and you're going to be visiting the doctor and quite likely losing vision in your eye. I've seen that happen.
Very good point. This is absolutely true. So I try to preempt that, and we actually use some good helmets with a cage. Fencing mask can work as well. We just have to make sure the training knife does not penetrate, doesn't fit through like a cage that has a square cage and all. So and so that's basically it, and we bring it up. So if you look at jiu-jitsu classes and you look at some beginners or an advanced person going with a beginner, you'll see the advanced person working their technique methodically, slowly, not trying to crush the other person's spirit, trying to bring them along. Hopefully that's the environment. Trying to bring them along, but the best way to show somebody jiu-jitsu is to do jiu-jitsu to them. And so that's what they learn. They go, wow, I got armbarred and I got choked and this and that. but you don't, but little by little, as they get better, okay, now black belt has to add a little more pressure and has to add more techniques. And then over time, when you get advanced people, they can go very slowly and get the same workout because they know what it's like to go hard, or they can go, okay, let's go today, and they go pretty good pace, but there's a very low risk of injury. So that's the exact same thing with the training. Now, the way we insert the knife is for self-defense. Generally, when we're first learning it, I have somebody already have the training knife out, and you actually start with a 2-on-1 grip. So if I'm on the back here, I have somebody in the guard. Okay, I'll start with that grip, ready, go. Then I'll get up to my knees and turn my back and try to take the knife out there. But we will start with the knife out with the grip. And then we'll say, okay, we're going to start with it stowed. The knife will be someplace, and we'll start moving slowly, and you're looking for that knife to come out. Because what we haven't talked about yet is the incredible importance of recognizing the draw. And recognizing the draw, again, we go back to that. Sure, yeah, I would expect a knife or a weapon in an actual street attack, but you're not trained to unless you do it in training. So you train yourself to be looking for that, and then we can do rolling where, like, maybe the knife will come out, maybe it won't come out. And then something that I found, I hope maybe help everybody, is one issue which when we have these training knives and we stow them, a lot of times if you're just going to grapple it a little bit and then it's going to come out later, a lot of times it comes out, it's hard to keep it in place while you're grappling. And so I had a revelation at one point, like, well, we're not trying to recognize the knife. We're recognizing the draw, the motion to draw the knife. That's what we want to recognize. So we don't even have to have a knife on us. So as you're going, and all of a sudden you see person's reaching back. Why would they reach back here? Yeah, they're coming in here, they're going here. Wherever they're reaching for something, and then you immediately, that's your cue to go into weaponry defense. Then you take that further and you keep doing that, and what naturally happens, just like in jiu-jitsu, you're learning triangle defense, okay? So you start rolling. Oh. Okay, well, you recognize it was a triangle after you were tapping, basically. And then little by little, you see it coming on and you can't stop it. And then little by little, okay, now I'm in it, but I'm kind of defending it. In the end, you're in a position where they can't throw a triangle on you in the first place. So that's what we want to do in the end. The end is to always be in a position where you're stifling the draw in the first place. And for example, now we don't want to be on our back in a street fight, of course, but if you end up there and you end up with someone in your guard and you want to do something to stand back up, or maybe for whatever reason you can't stand up, you're just stuck against the wall, whatever it is, just something to think about. If you go with a closed guard and you just make sure you really wrap right around the waist, not so much a high guard, but right around the waist. Most people carry knives in pockets or at the waist. There's neck knives and etc. But that stifles that from right there, whether it's a pistol or a knife, they cannot even draw it because you physically made a barrier. So that's what I call stifling the draw. And as you can see, this was just a natural progression. And anybody that just took the time that I did, I was very fortunate to have such a vast background of different martial arts to draw from also. That's very helpful. And of course, having great jiu-jitsu teachers and partners and all to work with that have the thought process there in an MMA. But it's just a natural progression, and you throw it in there, and guess what? It evolves into something that gives you a pretty good chance of surviving it.
So we've been mostly talking about knife and handgun, and you've got the advantage there of having a very extensive background in the Filipino martial arts, which are quite knife and stick oriented. You have the advantage of having done a lot of jiu-jitsu. You have the advantage of seeing a lot of what actually happens in the real world with those things, thanks to video. And you also have the advantage of having had teachers who are maybe not that far removed from somebody using this in a jungle patrol in World War II against the Japanese. So maybe the guy that you're learning from didn't use a bolo against a samurai sword, but his teacher did, or it's kind of still in the atmosphere. Let's pick a crazy weapon that's only known to us through some kung fu forms. Say, I don't know, hook knives or a 3-section staff. I've not seen any footage of any real fights with a 3-sectional staff. I personally have my doubts as to whether this was a real weapon or was this something that was invented to look good for demonstrations. I could be swayed either way, but I have my doubts. How would you say we gave you a year and a mission, and you chose to accept it, and that was to functionalize the 3-sectional staff or the hook knives or any other crazy ass weapon that we don't have any connections to, except, you know, like somebody jumping around wearing a silk suit in a wushu demo. How would you go about that?
Well, first, maybe I'll just send you my 3-sectional staff for the street video. no, but this is such a great question. So, I didn't mention earlier, but I have a science background. I studied biology at USC, and I worked in labs. I did research in multiple sclerosis. Had a PhD over me.
So you're getting the Bitcoin payments by the Illuminati just like I am.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
correct.
Perfect. Okay, good.
Yes. Man, good thing, because it's been kind of tough out there. But yeah, the science background, and so that's really, I think, what's helped me in this whole functional self-defense thing is like, well, it's just science. It's following the scientific method. Now, a lot of times you'll see, for example, Jeet Kune Do. JKD is often called scientific street fighting. And the reason people call it scientific street fighting is because there's some tactics, and also a lot of times they'll say it's scientific because everything's written out. It's like this and that and this, and we have all these cool things. Well, that's categorization in science. But when we're actually trying to find something out, how something works, and maybe a cure for something, what we have to do is have a hypothesis. Then we do a valid test. It simulates the environment of the actual situation we're looking at. And then we get results. And then we have to honor those results and tell the truth and just be honest about the results. And then once we have honest results, we can look and see how we can alter things. So that's basically what I did. So
and we have to see if other people can replicate those results, because maybe we end up with some result. I don't know, maybe you've got such amazing finger strength that you can work the one finger poke to the forehead and knock people out with it. And so we come away with a false positive that the one finger poke to the middle of the forehead is an effective self-defense technique. But until you've got your students and your students pulling it off, it's could just be a false positive. So I would say hypothesis testing, honoring the results, but also replication.
Replication is absolutely, and that's what we do in science. Whenever there's something new comes out, everybody else tries it. If they cannot replicate those results, that tells us that there is a faulty test. And so that's why absolutely, then we go out and make sure it's replicable. Because if it's not, what use is it to everybody? Okay, so what I do then is I simply go, okay, I'm going to take the 3-section staff. And let's see, I'm going to probably try it against stick. I'm going to try it against knife. Maybe even against empty hand, double sticks, and all this. And so all I would do is I'd get one that was safe that I could try to actually hit somebody with. And what I would do first was I'd start playing with it more, right? I'd play with it and I'd hit the bag and I'd do things. I'd try to figure some things out. And so I would come up with some hypotheses. And I think I can use it like this. And I have a feeling that the center thing is going to be kind of unwieldy, but maybe I can use that to block and this and that. Okay, great. Then I'm going to get some of my students. And like you say, some, not one. I have to get, not just I replicate, if I get good results and have somebody else replicate those results, but also I have to have for the valid test, a wide variety of different people coming at me. Just like, again, in jiu-jitsu, we have to have different people we go against because they have different games and different techniques and the way they're applying it. So then I simply just start sparring it. I spar it, and thankfully now we can videotape sparring. And then I go back and I go, oh, look, that worked there. And oh gosh, I thought that worked, but now I look at it on video, God, he hit me right in the hand. I didn't realize he hit me in the hand in the midst of that. And so I do a lot of sparring and then go, okay, let's try some more. And basically it's just sparring and sparring and sparring and playing with it. And then, like you said, when I feel pretty good about it, I have other people try it too. Try this, and then I won't tell them everything. I won't go, okay, do this, 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 because their creativity, they may come up with something I didn't even think of, which you got, I might think of that in the first place. That should have been the first thing I tried. So it's basic, it's just, again, science. You try to get a big group of scientists doing it, you start the research, and then you share your results. They take it, see what they can replicate, what they can add to it. And then when they add something, let's see if you can replicate that. And that's how we do it.
So I have two objections. One is kind of an objection or a question that comes from me, and I'll start with that one. I understand how we could train with a short stick or a knife or training knife and get semi-realistic results. But if you're starting to work with like a 6-foot staff, or one of my hypotheses with a 3-sectional staff would be to whip the damn thing around my head, trying to use it like a whip. And the person I'm sparring against is going to be, if it works, get clubbed in the head with a 9-foot or 8-foot long section of fairly heavy wood that, even if it's padded, is going to be fairly likely to hurt people. I know the Dog Brothers, when they've done staff sparring, they've dealt with a fair number of fractured clavicles. That's a fairly common injury. And again, if I took my 3-sectional staff and did an overhand number 1, the odds of breaking a clavicle, if it lands, even if it's padded, it's fairly high. So how do you, especially with the more impact-oriented weapons, like if we were trying to develop a system for baseball bat fighting, and we're only using plastic baseball bats, we're going to get false information, because a real baseball bat's bloody heavy and moves differently. So how do we train with a real baseball bat or a 9-foot section of wood?
Yeah, and that's where you have to get a few people who say, okay, I'm going to put on extra. I have, I think it's lacrosse, but it's for goalies, and it has shoulder pads and things like this. So sometimes if we're going to go with heavier sticks, not just the regular pretty solid rattan sticks, but even heavier yet, say, let's do some blocking drills, put a heavier helmet on, we'll put that on for a little bit more safety, and then we have to find the intrepid souls who will say, okay, I want to actually experience this, and then we start doing it, because your objection is 100% valid. And by the way, people, notice this is science also, because we're supposed to be critiquing each other. We're supposed to say, wait a second, you can't just go and spar with a wiffle bat and say this works all the time against a wiffle bat, because it's not the same weight. It's a totally different weapon. But that's what we should be doing, is constantly critiquing. But that's what we would have to do in the end. I mean, now I'll just say the 3-section staff, I don't have one right now, but the padded one I had in college was pretty hefty, even with, it had some hardwood on the middle, and it had some insulation sort of around it, pipe insulation, and that thing was pretty heavy. So I imagine it'd get you a pretty good wallop. But yeah, you're right. We'd have to at some point just go, okay, who wants to go out there, pad up and see how it feels, and that's where you'd have to take it to another level. But then we also have to always acknowledge that once we get into a real environment, the environment's free. No one ever told the other person what to do. They're not skilled. They might do something crazy. I mean, anything can happen. So we just have to understand that there's no, like, oh, this is the way to do it. No, hey, jiu-jitsu, you just do it like this and you'll beat everybody. Well, it doesn't quite work like that.
Yeah. So the second objection isn't mine. And it seems like this whole what if business, but I've seen fairly well-known instructors who are like, well, our style specializes in the blade. So what these Dog Brothers are doing, what these people sparring with these padded sticks are doing, that might be good for sticks, but it's giving them incredibly bad habits for the blade. With a blade, all I need to do is touch you. I don't need these big, powerful shots. If we're sparring, with sticks and fencing helmets. If you and I are fencing, and I just dink you in the head with the rattan stick, and you club me half a second later with a double-handed number one, you win that exchange. Their argument would be, yes, but with blades, that little dink initially would, I don't know, open your carotid, take out your eye, whatever, and I would have won. So how do you kind of account for the fact that you're not sparring with live blades, if you're going weapon on weapon, or even empty hand on weapon, that we don't have the penalty of screwing up? I suppose things like shock knives are one way to do it.
Yeah, so the shock knife, I do implement that. Before I get to that, though, is I totally agree. If you watch a lot of stick fighting, there are a lot of stick fighting tournaments I can't even watch because two people stand in front of each other, and whoever hits the other person more wins. So if I hit you 200 times and you hit me 210 times, you win, right? It's absurd. I don't know how it got to that.
It doesn't happen in Dog Brothers because getting hit a couple of times really bloody hurts. The story I always tell. I was sparring Loki Jorgensen, who was another Dog Brother, and we were outside fighting in a schoolyard. I'm not an official Dog Brother, but we were fighting, and I turned away.
Dog Brother stick. I mean, you're doing the stick fighting. That's what's important.
And I turned away a little bit, and he clubbed me across the back of the head where the fencing helmet, where the metal part clips over your head, in between that metal band and the edge of the helmet. So it was stick on skull. And I went, stop. And he stopped. And then I started to bawl, cry like a baby. And it wasn't from pain. I was so sad. I was just overcome with grief. And then 10 seconds later, there was a click, and it was that it just went away. It was like I'd been told my entire family had been murdered. And then it just went away. I was like, something really weird happened. I think it was neurological. I think we should stop for the day.
Yeah, that is weird. Here's hit one of those, hit the point. Wow, that's wild. But I will say, Dog Brothers as well, it's stick fighting, and the helmet does make a difference, and tough, durability makes a big difference. As soon as we go to blade, that's another thing. So a lot of the stick fighting, what you get is dealing with pressure. But if you look like Eric Noss, he was the best. He did not take many shots. He didn't get hit very often. When I was going, I'd go with Eric. We did not, there was not a lot of trading. Almost never was there trading because we didn't want to get hit. That was the first thing. Don't get hit. We don't want to get injured. But for example, in my classes or wherever, if I'm having people stick spar and they're using soft sticks, for example, or they're using the rattan, but we do most of it with soft sticks, and then those who want to will go with rattan. But you'll hear me saying, hey, treat it like a sword, treat it like a sword. If I see they're starting to put their hand up the block, if they're just coming in, hitting and saying, I hit you first and then taking a shot. No, that is not valid. And that takes away from the art, that art of distancing, having that precise distance where you just are outside the fighting measure, where they can't quite touch you without taking a step, and being able to take a little step in, hit, and then retreat out, or a little step in and go in to closer range. That's where to me, the art comes out, is when your goal is to not get hit. Not at all. It's a sword, a little, like you're saying, just a little tick on the carotid. That's it, right? A little flick in the eye, done. So that's what I'm always telling people, is treat it like a sword. It's sort of the mantra in the class. And when people get that, man, they really get sharp. They're training, it's tactics, everything, because the whole idea now is not let me hit him. The idea is, how do I hit him without getting hit myself? Which is basically, that's Kali.
I suppose if you watch the Western martial arts evolving from sword fighting in the streets of Venice in the 1600s to the sport of fencing, that idea of the first person to score the hit is, they found ways to encapsulate that idea within the sport. I mean, it's not necessarily the most realistic anymore because it's been many, many generations since there's been somebody, presumably, since the last person who had a real duel is teaching épée fencing. But have you ever seen that super weird German? Of course, it's the Germans, the Schlagermensur, where they've got these weird. Okay, my mother, when she grew up in Switzerland in the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s, had a couple old German professors who had these big ass facial scars.
Really? Wow.
And they had gotten this because they were in upper class dueling societies where they would wear these goggles. It looked very steampunk, a nose protector, a throat protector, but it would leave their cheeks open. And then they'd be, you and I, if you and I are going to go with this, we'd go with not a sharp tip sword, but a sharp bladed sword. We wouldn't be allowed to dodge. We wouldn't be allowed to move. We can't move our footwork. And we just basically hold our swords up and ding, 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 ding. And the goal is to wound the other guy. And ideally, at some point in your fencing career, come away with a great big facial scar. And that's why, like, the German Nazi villain often has like a big facial scar, because this was a real thing from the late 1800s to Schlager. I'll send you a link. There's some footage of it being recreated in movies, and it says that's not how people fought. If I can guarantee you that if you and I were really fighting with swords, one of us would try to step away and one of us would try to follow them. Instead, these two guys just standing in front of each other. I think you're only allowed to deliver a number one, or it's the most bizarre. Of course, it's German.
Well, there's a great book on fencing called On Fencing, I believe, by Nardi. And he actually had an actual épée duel.
Really?
He was a great fencer, but it's so interesting to hear his account and how they did this and the nerves and the whole thing. Even though he was supremely confident, now he's going to go do something with a guy who might actually impale him. It's very, very interesting. But yeah, the whole thing in fencing, one thing to think about though is we're talking about in the stick fighting and all this, sometimes it gets unrealistic because of the gear, because of the rules of engagement, the padded stick or the padded weapon. Well, they didn't have the lunge in fencing for a long time. And there, way back, there was a lunge that sometimes sneak underneath somebody's and counterattack. But as far as starting outside and coming in and then lunging toward an opponent purposefully, that actually came much later. It was more in the sport era, because once you lunge like that, it's very difficult to recover because you're so lunged out. So even if you hit somebody, they could counter you, and in reality, you may be dead. But in the sport, whoever touches first, and there's these rules of right of way in fencing, where you have to do something, and then it's your chance, it's your turn to go. The other person can only be defensive until they block or they do a defensive move, then they can counter. But like on that, they rely on the fact that if they hit, even if they get touched afterwards, that touch doesn't count. Épée, they have something where if both people hit at the same time, they don't have the right way épée. There's foil, épée, and saber, and it's just both people get a point. But the point being here that the point.
I get it.
There are some things in modern day fencing that are quite unrealistic that they've incorporated to make it more exciting. But we always have to, I mean, if we're talking about self-defense, one thing I'm always harping on is the 3 E's. If you're outside, there are 3 E's. There's the entry, there's the execution of the technique, and then the exit, and that's what most people forget. They come in like empty hand, they go in, they go, oh yeah, I got the punch in, but they're standing there. The guy's gonna punch you back. So the exit has to be. So once you get into range to hit, you then need to either exit back or forward, so you're not in that striking range, that trading range right there. And that's just so important. That's a beautiful thing about jiu-jitsu. Close the distance. Most people don't know what to do in the clinch. You take them down. Most people don't know what to do on the ground. You have such a huge advantage in that sort of one-on-one, no weaponry fighting situation.
Okay. Well, I think we've given people a pretty good introduction to some of the ideas that that just seem to come out again and again as soon as people start pressure testing this stuff. And I suppose that's ultimately the genius of jiu-jitsu, and it was the genius of judo as well, as opposed to all this hypothetical, you know, 10 moves in a, in a series. Here's the techniques. Now let's spar them. Now let's pressure test it. And I really appreciate the work that you've done to bring that concept to the self-defense sphere and to the weapon sphere and to the weapons defense sphere.
I'm pushing it. And I'm just going to say one last thing. In our lives, we have bad things happen. And as martial artists, if we can really discipline ourselves to take those bad things and turn them into positives, like every time you get tapped out, you get a little bit better. And, I have this obsession, maybe it's PTSD, I don't know, but I have this obsession with functional martial arts because I was abducted as a kid. And I had a very horrible experience. And I don't want anybody to have that feeling of having no power, being threatened. I thought I was going to die the whole time because the big dude, when I was a kid, kept telling me he was going to kill me constantly and all the terrible things that happened. But the point being, take that, and it's given me this thing where I want everything to really work for real. And I hope it can benefit, because there are people that put themselves in danger to protect us. And if we have to protect our families, we need to be able to actually make sure it works.
Yeah. How do you vet this stuff? Like, I agree that your stuff works, but it's difficult to say, to choose who you teach it to, especially if you're not doing it one-on-one. Like, in theory, this knowledge could be used for bad.
This is true. For the knife defense, the truth is, if you really understand how knife defense, high percentage or higher, I'm not going to say higher percentage, you have a better chance. Knife defense works. You've also learned what you need to foil in order to make it incredibly difficult for someone to stop your knife attack. It's just, I found, most of the criminal elements, those type of people, just not going to put the time in. Yeah. They're just not going to put the time in. So, like I have Piper knife, for example, Filipino knife. There's a lot of stuff, knife against empty hand. You teach somebody, you teach them for half an hour, and they can be very, 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 very effective with a knife. And that I just don't show everybody. Yeah. I'm just not going to do it. So, but the defense I will show, and if somebody wants to do it, the truth is most of the time when attackers go out with a knife, it's because they lost their mind temporarily or whatever it is, and now they're in such a rage they just want to go kill whoever they can. Unless you have the terrorists that, for example, in the London Bridge terror attack, where two guys, they knifed a bunch of people years ago. All our disarms and all that wouldn't have worked. And conversely, you could have gotten to that outside 2-on-1 and not had to worry about them switching hands. You know why?
Did they tape their weapons to their hands?
That's right. They tape the weapon to their hands, so there's no way they're going to lose the weapon, which also means they can't switch hands. But see, things like that.
I'm just struck by the guy who used a narwhal tusk that he grabbed off the wall of the fish market to help defend against that. Like, that is, I'm pro improvised weapons, but it's never going to get better than a narwhal tusk.
Never. How is it going to get better than that? I have a use for you, narwhal tusk. Let's go. Wow, unbelievable. But I put out there, because also the other thing is, pretty much anybody can go buy a gun if they want to really do damage. And they want to take the easy way, they're going to do this. This is not easy. This takes work.
Yeah. Well, it's always a pleasure talking to you, Burton. I always learn a lot, and I hope our audience has learned a lot too. How do people find out more about you? How do people keep up with it seems like you're beginning to teach again, which is good news. You just published a new book. Congratulations. It's always funny, I'm sure, hearing about your new book, given that you've probably been working on it for 2 years. But,
even more. Yeah, it's been a while. But it's nice that the book is out there, and it's gotten very, very. I'm very pleased with the reviews. It's a life work, right there, and I think it's structured really well, and hopefully it'll help a lot of people to bring that along. But if you want to see what I'm doing, my website is jkdunlimited.com, because all of this really stems from Bruce Lee's philosophy of functional fighting and the scientific approach, right? So jkdunlimited.com. You can find me on Facebook, Burton Richardson, Instagram, JKD Unlimited. I think, yeah, you just type in my name, you'll find me. And I'm going to be putting out a lot more material and programs so I can hopefully affect more people, because I have a friend named Stephen Kesting who showed me how to set up a studio. It's not nowhere near as good as yours, but in the next, actually on Thursday, my screen is finally arriving and it'll be much better. So
I hope it's a green screen so that you can film instructionals standing over a pit of lava or something, because that would be cool.
My student Scott Ishihara just mentioned that. I got this white screen coming. It's gonna have some texture and all. He goes, oh, if it was green, you could do it, anywhere. That'd been funny, but
lightsaber defense for the street.
That's right. Okay, but thank you so much for everything you do and all the years, and many more to come.
Many more. Take care, man.
Okay, aloha.